Imagine this, you go to Jesus appealing to some sense of justice and fairness. And you say, well, my brother inherited the family inheritance. And really, can you speak with him? Can you demand that he divide his inheritance with me? Maybe the man who approached Jesus might be the second born, like me. And Jesus' response is interesting. First he says, he calls him friend. So he doesn't quite write him off. He says, friend, good fellow, who made me your judge? Who made me the judge or arbiter? Who made me the one to decide about your family inheritance, about what you should get and what your brother should get? Then he goes into this whole diatribe. Actually, if you look at it, you don't know whether it is Jesus using humor, because it just doesn't seem right. For someone who came with a heavy heart or some kind of concern on his or her mind, and Jesus then gives him this sermon that shoots him down. Almost seems, it seems cruel. But then Jesus does tell him, well, your heart is set on things that are below. But you should really set your heart on God in future, in Christ. He wouldn't have told him all of that, but that's bottom line as we look at it today. What we need to understand before we go away from this saying, oh, Jesus is just being unfair, is that in the households at that time, whether they were Hebrew or whether they were other communities, and the Samaritans and others in that part of the world, the lifestyle even today in the Middle East is communal. You understand that, right? Families generally live together. It's the same in Africa, much of Africa, and other parts of the East. And so, not everyone gets, let's just say, everyone gets something. Everyone gets something. If you work the riches of the family was rich, so everyone is taken care of. You don't just get kicked in the butt and sent away when the patriarch dies. The family is cared for. So it's not like the second brother did not have anything. Are we together? He was not destitute. But in the lineage, in the line of things, the eldest son, remember Jacob and Esau, the story of the inheritance, it so happened that the eldest son, more often than not, got the most, the lion's share. We can argue whether it was right or wrong. Being second born, I think it's wrong. Didn't work like that in my house, though. Thank God. So Jesus had the right to say, okay, you want to be all dizzy about wealth? Let me tell you the story. You want to be greedy? Let me tell you the story. If you had need, I would respond. So God's fairness is about responding to need when it comes to material things. When it comes to this worldly things. It is not a fairness that responds to greed. When you go to a church and they tell you, just name it and claim it, you shouldn't be driving this Toyota, you should be driving this whatever else. I'm not going to name cars because some of us do have these cars. You know what the point I'm making, not about whether that car is bad or good. But there are churches that will tell you, if you're not driving this kind of thing, then something is wrong. You need to check your relationship with God. That is bunkum. That's a nice way of saying what you're all thinking. The English are always, respected. Anybody who thinks they can reach out to God, laying claim to fairness, and they're reaching out because of greed, let the scripture tell us, I include myself, let the scripture tell us that Jesus will call you a fool. Hello? It's interesting that in scripture, when the Lord is talking about what is sin, when he talks about murder and everything else, it says if you call a person a fool, then you are committing murder. Are we together? Remember that text? Even if you call a person a fool, you are committing murder. So you are just as guilty as the one you want to stone or you want to punish. You want to banish to eternal oblivion or doom because they have done something bad. But even in normal life, if you call someone a fool, then you are just as guilty because you are judging them. Yet the word fool does appear in context like this. As we try to connect that, we have to accept that what Jesus is saying, the one whose heart is set on the things of this world is as guilty as a fool, as a murderer, so you are damned. Yeah, I know in the Lutheran Church we don't use the word damned much. Except when we are at home and we hurt our finger when we, as you know. I use a different sense of the word damned. Those who store up treasures for themselves are going to a lost eternity. Those that are rich in God will know Him and will know eternal life in Him. I, as you know, try my best to have some illustrations in my sermon, and it's a good practice for preachers. And I was struggling with it all week, since Tuesday. And then the unfortunate incidents of yesterday and this morning. The person who was the shooter in El Paso published a manifesto saying that what he's trying to do is get rid of the Mexicans. He even named the weapon he was going to use, so there's no coincidence, an AK-47. Some people are saying it was a rifle or something, but it is not an automatic weapon, which nobody has need to have in this country. This is when I need to get an amen. But I don't want to be waylaid, even though I believe this strongly in the whole fight for gun control. This whole thing that happened in El Paso is about greed. The fear that the manifesto talks about that he is trying to allay, it's actually about fear, and greed is normally about fear. Is that the Mexicans are going to outnumber what he calls the Americans. And they're going to take over what is whiteness and create a new culture. Mexican Americans were killed, were amongst those that were killed, the 20, and those that were injured. I think it's interesting to take that whole concept of greed in that whole incident to, let's say, 170 years ago. You going to come with me? 170 years ago? We got time. Remember the American-Mexican War? in the mid-1840s, when the country, under the leadership of President Polk, decided that we needed more land. There's some kind of BS, this time I said BS, there's some kind of BS that said that we had the right, any country has the right to have access to the ocean. California was Mexico, as was Nevada. And the US sent its so-called negotiator with a gun in his hand to say negotiate or not, or negotiate or see what will happen. That's not a negotiation. That's a threat. The war lasted 2 years or so, and a so-called treaty was formulated, where the Americans paid $15 to $16 million to Mexico for 1/3 of Mexican land. Texas was Mexico. Arizona was Mexico. And how many of you know this? You know your history, right? But it's important to name it today. The two other states I mentioned, New Mexico, add that to it. They were all part of Mexico. That treaty left Mexico in turmoil to this day. There were some Mexicans who were now living in the US, or in America, as it was called at that time. And then they became illegal. Imagine that. The border was moved. It's like, let's say Cuba, because there's a lot of Cubans that are now in South Florida, right? Let's say Cuba decides, well, we're going to take over South Florida, because our people are there. How would we feel up here? I don't think very good. So that whole land on either side of the now new border became an area that bred all kinds of hatred, all kinds of struggle, was breeding ground for drugs and gangs, continues to this day. In Mexico, it caused a halt to economic development and therefore a need that runs through generation, material need. On the American side, oil was found in Texas. The country put its resources into developing all of these states that were formerly Mexico. No, it was greed, it was not need. And so we continue, sadly, to see the effects of that. Because any movement, any conquest that is driven by greed is doomed to be an embarrassment and doomed to fail. The sad thing is that many of these countries are part of what is now called the Bible Belt. Excuse me if you're from Utah, but Utah was Mexico. So people believe that God took the land called America and took it from the Mexicans to give it to America because, Lord, they should share with us. I don't want to go further back to how America was born in the 1600s. But God help us if we think what we do in the name of God. Okay, Pastor, so what do we do here? You just gave us a history lesson, which we all knew, so I don't know why you're wasting your time. only have short memories. It's so easy to be driven by fear to oppose comprehensive immigration reform. Sisters and brothers, you thought I was not going to say the C word, or the I word, however you want to see it. Here in Gainesville, we continue to experience the effects of a broken immigration system. Throughout the country, it's a time bomb waiting to happen. I'm going to come to a close. One of my, heroes in the faith, one of the theologians that I felt was speaking my heart when I was in my 20s, was the theologian Karl Barth. Any of you heard of Karl Barth? One of the things that stuck with me about what he said when I was in my 20s was saying that we need, as we approach our faith, we need to read the newspaper in one hand. Hello? We need to read the newspaper in one hand, and we need to hold the Bible in the other hand. And we need to look at what is happening every day through the eyes of faith. If not, what we believe is irrelevant, and it's otherworldly. And it is of no use to the call of the gospel, to call people to Jesus Christ, to experience this life that we say we have in Christ. We're not calling people out of this world to live in an airy-fairy world, as other theologians said, pie in the sky when we die. And so that's what I'm doing today. So what is God calling us to do? Joan and others in our church have formed and led a movement that visits the Baker Detention Center. People are held there for longer than the stipulated 90-day period, 4 years. There are raids here that declare people to be illegal, even when they have papers. And God asks us, you don't have enough? We don't have enough? This shooter said that they are taking our jobs. Not true, not true. It is not true, contrary to what people say. And so it sounds like this man who came to Jesus and said, Master, let me have more of this inheritance, even though, and Jesus was thinking, even though you have so much. This time of Pentecost, we talk about the coming of the Holy Spirit to give us power to be witnesses of this gospel in the world. You shall receive power, Acts chapter 1 verse 8 says, so that you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and all parts of the world. No, not that you will conquer the rest of the world and become an imperial power that takes over the world under the guise of spreading the gospel. No, that you will be my witnesses to the rest of the world so that the world will come to know who I am. And in so knowing who I am, they will have life in its fullness, life eternal, and that sin will have no power over them anymore. Not to go and show people what it means to be cruel and caught under the grasp of sin. That is what the church has done as we accompany the imperial powers. You and I can change that in our little ways. Starting with looking, I think one of the things, starting with looking at the issues around Baker Detention Center. Starting to support Westminster Presbyterian Church in its sanctuary house, starting to stick our necks out for the sake of justice. That's what Jesus would do.